The Zephyrians had arrived 3 days ago with all the subtlety of a freight train hitting a butterfly sanctuary. Their ships, these massive, crystalline monstrosities that looked like someone had weaponized a chandelier, now blotted out the twin suns of the Kepler system. 27 vessels, each one the size of Manhattan and twice as unfriendly. Commander Vextar of the Zephyrian First Fleet stood on his command bridge, his 4 arms crossed in what his species considered a gesture of supreme confidence. His translator crackled as he addressed the human settlement below. Primitive mammals, his voice echoed across every communication device on the planet, you have been found guilty of existing in a star system designated for Zephyrian expansion. Your execution will commence in 12 of your minutes. We suggest you spend this time in whatever ritualistic death preparations your species prefers. Down on Kepler 442b in the Colonial Administration Center, Governor Marcus Webb was having what you might generously call a moment. The kind of moment where you realize that all your contingency plans, all your emergency protocols, all your carefully laid strategies amount to exactly jack squat when faced with an armada of space-age death dealers. Options? He asked his counsel, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. We could surrender, offered Colonial Defense Chief Amanda Rodriguez, her voice flat. Beg for mercy. The Zephyrians don't have a word for mercy in their language, Dr. Chen interjected, still frantically typing on her tablet. I checked. Their closest equivalent translates to delayed execution. Governor Webb stared out the reinforced window at the alien ships above. In the distance, he could see families huddled together in the streets, some praying, others just holding each other. 47 years of human dreams, innovation, and stubborn determination about to be snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. What would you do if you had 12 minutes to save your entire world? That's when the sky started screaming. Not the aliens. They were still maintaining their ominous silence, counting down humanity's final moments with the patience of cosmic executioners. No, this was something else entirely. A sound that started as a whisper and built to a roar, like the universe itself was being torn apart. Dr. Chen was the first to spot them on her instruments. Governor, she said, her voice barely a whisper, we've got incoming. More Zephyrians? Rodriguez asked, her hand instinctively moving to her sidearm. Not that it would do much good against alien death rays. No, Chen's eyes widened as she stared at her readings. These are human signatures. But that's impossible. The nearest human fleet is 6 months away, and the first pod hit the atmosphere like God's own meteor, trailing fire and fury as it screamed toward the surface. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the sky was filled with them, hundreds of falling stars, each one burning bright enough to cast shadows on the ground below. On his command bridge, Commander Vextar felt something he hadn't experienced in his 3 centuries of conquest. Confusion. His tactical officer, a nervous creature named Clixon, approached with obvious reluctance. Commander, Clixon chittered, our sensors are detecting massive kinetic impacts across the planet's surface. The signatures are unusual. Unusual how? Vextar's voice carried the kind of edge that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. They appear to be some form of primitive insertion pods, sir. But the energy readings are, well, they're off the charts. Whatever's inside them, it's generating power levels that shouldn't be possible for human technology. Vextar's mandibles clicked in what humans might recognize as annoyance. Scan the contents of these pods. Attempting to comply, sir, but Clixon's voice cracked. Sir, each pod contains a single human life form. But the biometric readings are. Spit it out. Their stress hormones are at lethal levels, sir. Their neural activity suggests extreme emotional trauma. And their adrenaline readings are so high that by all medical standards, they should be dead. Down on the planet's surface, the first pod cracked open with a hiss of escaping atmosphere. Steam rose from the impact crater as the metal shell split like an egg, revealing its contents to the waiting world. What emerged wasn't quite human anymore. Lieutenant Jake Morrison had been dead for approximately 4 minutes and 37 seconds when the experimental resurrection technology brought him back. Not dead, mind you, more like mostly dead but getting better. The kind of dead where your heart stops, your brain flatlines, and then advanced medical science yanks you back from the void with all the subtlety of a freight train. The catch. Coming back from clinical death tends to leave you with a few personality adjustments. Jake's eyes opened, glowing with an unnatural blue light that came from the combat stimulants coursing through his veins. His muscles bulged with synthetic enhancements that made him look like someone had taken a normal soldier and fed him nothing but protein powder and concentrated rage for 6 months. "Target acquired," he growled, his voice distorted by the breathing apparatus that kept his supercharged metabolism from burning through his oxygen supply. Alien bastards picked the wrong species to mess with. All across the colony, similar scenes were playing out. Pods crashing down, steam rising, and figures emerging that looked like humanity's answer to a nightmare fever dream. These weren't just soldiers. They were the Colonial Defense Force's most desperate experiment come to life. The Lazarus Protocol. Dr. Chin, watching from the administration center, felt her scientific mind trying to process what she was seeing. "My God," she whispered. "They actually did it. They actually brought back the dead." You see, 3 months ago, Earth had received Kepler 442b's distress call about increasing Zephyrian scout activity. By the time a response fleet could be organized and sent, everyone knew it would be too late. So Earth's military scientists had proposed something that would have made Mary Shelley proud. If you can't send live soldiers in time, why not send dead ones? The Lazarus units were volunteers who had died in Earth's recent conflicts, brought back through a combination of advanced medical technology, synthetic biology, and a cocktail of drugs that would make a pharmacy nervous. They felt no pain, showed no mercy, and had exactly one mission: ensure human survival at any cost. And right now, they were really angry about being dead. Jake Morrison surveyed the colonial settlement with eyes that glowed like blue stars. His enhanced senses picked up every detail: the terrified colonists huddled in buildings, the massive alien ships hanging in the sky like death itself, the smell of fear and desperation that hung over everything like a fog. But what struck him most was something else entirely. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, peeking out from behind a barricade. She was clutching a stuffed animal, some kind of purple alien creature that was probably supposed to be cute and friendly. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Hey there, princess." Jake's voice modulator made him sound like he'd gargled gravel, but he tried to keep it gentle. "What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered, her eyes wide as she stared at this glowing-eyed giant who'd just fallen from the sky. "Well, Emma, I've got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that those ugly ships up there want to hurt you and everyone you care about." Jake's enhanced targeting system automatically locked onto the nearest Zephyrian vessel as he spoke. "The good news is that me and my friends here, we specialize in making sure that doesn't happen." He knelt down to her level, his powered armor servos whining softly. "You know what the secret is to beating monsters, Emma?" She shook her head. "You become a bigger monster. What makes humans special isn't just our technology or our tactics. It's our willingness to sacrifice everything, even our own humanity, to protect the people we love." The Zephyrians were about to learn this lesson the hard way. On the command bridge, Vextar was discovering that his tactical superiority wasn't feeling quite so superior anymore. His sensors were lighting up with contact after contact as more Lazarus pods landed across the planet's surface. Each one contained another impossible human, another walking contradiction to everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about this species. "Status report," he demanded. "Sir," Clixon's voice was getting higher with each word, "the humans they're not following standard combat protocols. They're ignoring our weapons fire, sir. Direct plasma hits that should vaporize them are barely slowing them down." "That's impossible. Human biology cannot withstand." "Sir," another officer interrupted. "We're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's one of them." Jake Morrison's face appeared on the main viewer, his blue eyes blazing with unnatural light. Behind him, the sky flickered with explosions as his fellow Lazarus units began their assault on Zephyrian ground forces. "Attention, alien assholes," Jake's voice carried across the bridge with the kind of casual menace usually reserved for mob enforcers. "My name is Lieutenant Jake Morrison, Colonial Defense Force. I died defending a human colony 3 months ago. Then my government brought me back from the dead and sent me here to protect these people." Vextar's forearms flexed in agitation. "Impossible. Death is irreversible." "Yeah, well, humans have this annoying habit of making impossible things happen. Jake grinned, showing teeth that had been replaced with titanium implants. Here's the thing about bringing people back from the dead. It tends to make them really, really pissed off about dying in the first place. What happened next was less of a battle and more of a masterclass in why you should never, ever corner a species that considers bringing back the dead a viable military strategy. The Lazarus units moved like ghosts made of fury and determination. They didn't take cover, they charged. They didn't retreat, they advanced. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they improvised with whatever was handy. And when they took damage that should have killed them, they just got angrier. Sergeant Maria Santos, formerly deceased courtesy of a mining accident on Europa, found herself face to face with a Zephyrian ground unit. The aliens were tall, crystalline beings that sparkled in the sunlight like deadly prisms. Their plasma rifles could cut through steel like butter. "You are already dead, human," one of them declared through its translator. "Why do you continue to fight?" Maria paused in the middle of reloading her rifle, tilted her head, and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You know what I learned about being dead?" she said conversationally. "It's really boring. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, no aliens to shoot." She finished reloading and raised her weapon. "Thanks for giving me something to do with my afternoon." The Zephyrians discovered something that day. There's a significant psychological disadvantage to fighting an enemy that has literally nothing left to lose because they've already lost everything, including their lives. Back on the command ship, Vextar was having what military historians would later describe as a moment of profound tactical reevaluation. His ground forces were being systematically dismantled by an enemy that shouldn't exist, using tactics that violated several laws of physics and at least 3 conventions of civilized warfare. "Sir," his communications officer reported with the kind of tone usually reserved for delivering terminal medical diagnoses, "we've lost contact with ground teams Alpha through Theta. The humans are, sir, they're not just fighting back. They're hunting us." Through the viewing portal, Vextar could see the colonial settlement that should have been a smoking ruin. Instead, it was alive with activity as human civilians worked alongside their undead protectors to fortify their positions. Children were handing ammunition to soldiers who had died before they were born. Adults were treating wounds on warriors who technically didn't need medical attention anymore because they were already dead. "How many humans did we count initially?" Vextar asked quietly. "Approximately 50,000 colonists, sir." "And how many of these Lazarus units have landed?" "Current count is approaching 2,000, sir. And more pods are still incoming." Vextar did the math. 2,000 humans who couldn't be killed because they were already dead, protecting 50,000 humans who were very much alive and increasingly angry about alien invasion attempts. His 27 ships suddenly didn't seem like quite enough. But wait, there's more. Dr. Chin, still monitoring everything from the administration center, had been doing some math of her own. And what she'd discovered was either going to save them all or get everyone killed. Possibly both. "Governor," she said, her voice tight with excitement and terror, "I need you to see this." Webb looked at her tablet, then at her, then back at the tablet. "Are you telling me that these Lazarus units are powered by quantum resonance generators?" "Yes. Each one is essentially a miniature star contained in a human-shaped shell." Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard as she pulled up more data. "They're not just soldiers, Governor. They're walking bombs." "How big of bombs are we talking about?" "Well," Chen's smile was the kind that suggested she'd been spending too much time around people who'd been recently dead. "Each unit generates enough power to level a city block. If we could somehow overload their systems simultaneously." Governor Webb stared at the readings, then out at the alien ships hanging in his sky like a death sentence. "Dr. Chin, are you suggesting we turn our rescuers into a weapon of mass destruction?" "I'm suggesting we give them the option," she replied. "It's their choice. They're already dead. This would just make their deaths count for something bigger." Jake Morrison received the transmission while he was in the middle of explaining to a group of Zephyrian soldiers why shooting him in the chest was a waste of perfectly good plasma. The tactical data scrolled across his enhanced vision as Dr. Chen's voice crackled through his comm unit. "All Lazarus units, this is Dr. Sarah Chin, Colonial Science Division. We've discovered that your power cores can be overloaded in a controlled cascade reaction. The resulting explosion would be sufficient to destroy the entire Zephyrian fleet." Jake paused in the middle of punching a hole through an alien's crystalline torso. Doc, are you asking us to die again? I'm asking you to choose how your deaths matter, Lieutenant. Around the planet, similar conversations were happening. 2,000 dead soldiers, each one facing the same question. Do you want to save these people badly enough to die for them twice? The answer came back in stereo from 2,000 voices speaking as one. Hell yes. What happened next was the kind of moment that gets written about in history books, assuming anyone survives to write them. 2,000 Lazarus units, scattered across the planet's surface, began the sequence that would overload their quantum cores. But here's the thing about humans, we're sentimental. Even our dead ones. Jake Morrison, his power core building toward critical overload, knelt down one last time beside little Emma, who was still clutching her purple alien stuffed animal. Hey, princess, he said, his voice modulator crackling as his systems began to fail. Remember what I told you about monsters? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Sometimes the monster is the good guy, he smiled, his blue eyes flickering as his quantum core approached cascade failure. And sometimes, being human means being willing to be the monster that protects everyone else. He stood up, looked at the sky full of alien death ships, and activated his comm one last time. All Lazarus units, this is Morrison. On my mark, we light up this sky like the 4th of July. The explosion that followed could be seen from 3 star systems away. 2,000 miniature suns going supernova simultaneously, their combined energy reaching up from the planet's surface like the fist of an angry god. The Zephyrian fleet, caught completely off guard by an attack that violated everything they thought they knew about human capabilities, simply ceased to exist. Vextar had approximately 0.3 seconds to realize that his species had fundamentally misunderstood what they were dealing with before his ship was vaporized along with the rest of his armada. When the light faded, Kepler 442b was still there. Scarred, smoking but alive. 50,000 human colonists stood in the aftermath, staring up at a sky that was once again blue and empty of hostile alien ships. Governor Webb walked out of the administration center and found Emma still standing where Jake had left her, still holding her purple alien toy. She looked up at him with the kind of wisdom that children shouldn't have to possess. The monsters saved us, she said simply. Yeah. Webb knelt down beside her, looking up at the sky where 2,000 heroes had just written their names across the cosmos in letters of fire. They did. 3 days later, as cleanup crews worked to repair the damage and colonial life slowly returned to normal, Dr. Chen made a discovery that chilled her to the bone. The quantum signature from the Lazarus explosion hadn't just destroyed the Zephyrian fleet. It had sent a signal, a massive, unmistakable beacon that announced to the entire galaxy that humanity had mastered the technology of death itself. And according to her deep space sensors, that signal had just been received by something much bigger than the Zephyrian Empire. Something that was already changing course toward human space. Governor, Chen said, her voice barely a whisper as she stared at readings that defied comprehension, I don't think we're the only species that knows how to bring back the dead. In the depths of space, something ancient and hungry turned its attention toward the small blue-green world that had just announced itself as the galaxy's newest nightmare. Something that had been waiting a very long time for someone to rediscover the secrets of death and resurrection. Something that remembered the last time a species had tried to cheat death on an industrial scale. And it was coming to remind humanity that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The question isn't whether humanity can survive what's coming next. The question is whether the galaxy can survive what humanity is willing to become to protect itself. After all, if you think undead super soldiers are terrifying, wait until you see what humans do when they really get creative. Dr. Sarah Chen hadn't slept in 4 days, which wasn't unusual for someone tracking an approaching apocalypse. What was unusual was that the apocalypse seemed to be taking its sweet time getting here, like it was stopping for space coffee and cosmic donuts along the way. Still nothing on the deep space sensors? Governor Webb asked, setting down what had to be his 20th cup of coffee this week. The man looked like he'd aged 10 years in the 6 months since the Kepler incident, which was understandable considering his planet had become ground zero for humanity's most terrifying military breakthrough. Oh, there's something out there all right, Chen muttered, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed readings so off the charts they'd basically invented new charts. It's just weird. The signature keeps changing, like whatever's coming is constantly shifting between different energy states. Shifting how? Like it can't decide if it wants to be alive or dead. Webb felt that familiar chill that had become his constant companion since the Lazarus incident. Please tell me you're speaking metaphorically. Chen's silence was answer enough. Outside the reinforced windows of the Colonial Administration Center, Kepler 442b looked almost normal. Almost. If you ignored the memorial gardens where 2,000 graves stood empty because their occupants had gone out in the most spectacular fireworks display in galactic history. If you ignored the subtle blue glow that still emanated from the impact craters where the Lazarus pods had landed. If you ignored the fact that every colonist now carried a weapon and looked at the sky with the suspicious glare of people who'd learned that space was full of things that wanted to kill them. What would you do if you discovered that saving your world had painted a target on your entire species? Meanwhile, back on Earth, the Colonial Defense Force headquarters was experiencing what military historians would later term organized chaos with a side of existential dread. Admiral Rebecca Harrison, the woman responsible for authorizing the Lazarus Protocol, stood before a wall of screens showing every human colony in known space. All 47 of them were now under threat. Status report, she commanded, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made seasoned soldiers stand straighter. Ma'am, Colonel Torres stepped forward with a datapad that practically radiated bad news. We've detected similar energy signatures approaching 12 different systems. Whatever responded to the Kepler signal, it's not traveling alone. How long do we have? Based on their current trajectory and speed, anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months depending on the system. Admiral Harrison studied the tactical display, her mind running through scenarios that all ended the same way, badly. Recommendations. The Joint Chiefs are suggesting we accelerate the Lazarus program. Mass production of resurrection technology, conversion of all colonial defense forces to undead status, full militarization of... Colonel, Harrison's voice cut through his briefing like a laser through butter. Are you suggesting we kill our entire military and bring them back as weapons? Ma'am, with respect, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. The Lazarus units at Kepler were devastating against conventional forces. If we're facing something that can match their capabilities... Harrison turned back to the screens showing human colonies scattered across the galaxy. Families, children, dreams built on distant worlds. All of them depending on her to make impossible decisions. There's one problem with your plan, Colonel. Ma'am? We still don't know what we're actually fighting. The answer came 3 days later, when humanity made first contact with something that would haunt their nightmares for generations to come. The transmission reached Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station at precisely 14:32 Greenwich Mean Time on a Tuesday that started normal and ended with everyone questioning the fundamental nature of reality. The signal was clean, clear, and absolutely terrifying in its casual politeness. Greetings, young species. The voice that emerged from the speakers sounded almost human, too human, like someone was wearing humanity's voice like an ill-fitting costume. We are the Nekark Collective, shepherds of the final frontier. We understand you have recently discovered the art of death transcendence. How quaint. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's leading xenobiologist, stared at the waveform analysis scrolling across her screens. This is impossible, she whispered. The vocal patterns, the linguistic structure. It's like they learned our languages by studying our dead. The transmission continued, unaware of the growing horror in the monitoring station. We have been observers of galactic civilization for approximately 47,000 of your years. In that time, we have encountered 137 species that achieved resurrection technology. You are the 138th. What happened to the other 137? Admiral Harrison's voice crackled through the comm from CDF headquarters. The pause that followed was filled with the kind of cosmic static that suggested vast distances and vaster intentions. They joined us, of course. Death, you see, is not the end. It is merely the beginning of true understanding. We have come to offer you the same opportunity. And if we decline your generous offer? Harrison's voice carried the kind of diplomatic courtesy usually reserved for negotiations with armed lunatics. Oh, Admiral Harrison of the Colonial Defense Force? The voice carried a hint of amusement that felt like ice water in everyone's veins. Declining is not an option. You have already taken the first step by mastering resurrection technology. The dead call to the dead after all. Your Lazarus units sang such a beautiful song when they died the second time. Dr. Chin, monitoring the transmission from Kepler 442b, felt pieces of a cosmic horror puzzle clicking into place in her mind. Oh my God, she breathed. The quantum signatures. The energy readings from the approaching ships. What is it, Sarah? Governor Webb leaned over her shoulder, watching data streams that looked like abstract art painted in terror. They're not alive, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The crews on those ships, they're all dead. All of them. The Neckart Collective isn't a species. It's a collection of every species that ever mastered resurrection technology. Back on Earth, Admiral Harrison was reaching the same conclusion. Dr. Vasquez cross-referenced the linguistic patterns in their transmission with our xenological databases. Focus on extinct civilizations. Minutes passed like hours as the AI systems churned through decades of accumulated knowledge about dead civilizations. The results, when they came, painted a picture that would have been unbelievable if it hadn't been so horrifyingly logical. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez's voice shook as she read the analysis. The linguistic patterns match fragments from 17 different extinct species. The Valdorians, who disappeared 8,000 years ago. The Kethmori Empire, gone for 12,000 years. The eternal hegemony of Zarthak. All species that achieved advanced technology and then vanished without a trace, Harrison finished. They didn't go extinct. They were recruited. What happened next was pure humanity at its finest and most terrifying. Faced with an enemy that collected dead civilizations like cosmic trophies, Earth's response was characteristically insane. They decided to get deader faster than anyone else in galactic history. Within 72 hours, volunteers were lining up around the block at every military installation on Earth. Not volunteers to fight, volunteers to die. The Lazarus Protocol, originally designed as a desperate last resort, had become humanity's first and only strategy for survival. Let me get this straight. Lieutenant Maria Santos, still technically dead from her previous assignment, addressed a room full of very much alive volunteers. You want to die, get resurrected as quantum-powered super soldiers, and then fight a collective of dead alien civilizations for the right to remain independently deceased? A forest of hands shot up. And you understand that this process involves actual clinical death, technological resurrection, and the psychological trauma of experiencing your own mortality on a very personal level? Even more hands went up. Santos looked around the room at eager faces belonging to people who were volunteering for the most extreme military service in human history. Anyone want to explain why you'd voluntarily sign up for this? A young woman in the front row, couldn't have been more than 20, who raised her hand. Ma'am, with respect, they want to turn us into their collection. Make us part of some cosmic undead empire. She paused, glancing around at her fellow volunteers. We figured if we're going to be dead anyway, we might as well be dead on our own terms. Santos felt something that might have been pride, if dead people could feel pride. What's your name, soldier? Emma Patterson, ma'am. I grew up on Kepler 442b. I was there when Lieutenant Morrison and his team saved us. Santos blinked. The same Emma? The little girl with the purple alien toy? How old are you now, Patterson? 18 as of last week, ma'am. Old enough to enlist, old enough to die for my people. And there it was, the human response to cosmic horror. Not surrender, not despair, but a collective decision to weaponize their own mortality. The next 3 weeks saw humanity transform itself in ways that would have been unthinkable before first contact with hostile alien forces. Massive resurrection facilities were constructed on 17 different worlds. Volunteer death squads underwent training that included advanced combat techniques for the recently deceased and quantum core management for beginners. Dr. Chin, now serving as chief scientific advisor for the Lazarus program, found herself dealing with questions that no one should ever have to ask. How many times can you resurrect the same person before they lose their humanity entirely? Governor Webb asked during one of their daily briefings. Theoretically? Unknown. Practically? We're about to find out. Chin pulled up holographic displays showing resurrection success rates. The good news is that subjects retain their personality, memories, and core identity through at least 3 death resurrection cycles. The bad news is that each resurrection makes them more. More what? More willing to die. More comfortable with violence. more accepting of the impossible. Chen paused, studying data that suggested humanity was evolving in real time. Jake Morrison has died and been resurrected 4 times now for training purposes. He's become something that's technically human but operates on entirely different psychological parameters. Is that good or bad? For fighting cosmic horrors? Probably good. For maintaining a functional civilization afterward? Chen's expression suggested she'd rather not think about it. The Nekark Collective announced their arrival in typical dramatic fashion, by blotting out the sun of the Proxima Centauri system and broadcasting a message that could be heard across 3 sectors. Children of Earth, the voice that had haunted humanity's dreams for weeks crackled across every communication device in human space. We have come to welcome you home. Resistance is inadvisable. The ships that emerged from hyperspace defied every principle of physics and several laws of common sense. They looked like they'd been grown rather than built, organic curves covered in technological additions that sparkled with the kind of light that suggested they'd been scavenged from dead civilizations across the galaxy. Admiral Harrison, now commanding humanity's response from the bridge of the experimental vessel Lazarus Rising, watched the enemy fleet materialize on her screens. Hundreds of ships, each one a graveyard of technology from species that had thought they were clever enough to cheat death. "Ma'am," her tactical officer reported with the kind of professional calm that suggested he'd made peace with his own mortality, "enemy fleet composition is unusual. We're detecting life signs, but they're not registering as alive exactly." "How many ships?" 473 capital vessels, roughly 2,000 support craft, and... The officer paused, double-checking his readings, something that's either a moon-sized battle station or a small planet that someone strapped engines to. Harrison nodded grimly. "And our forces?" 1,200 Lazarus units spread across 17 ships, plus whatever's left of the colonial defense fleets. In any sane universe, those odds would have been cause for immediate surrender. But humanity had stopped living in a sane universe the moment they decided that bringing people back from the dead was a reasonable military strategy. "All ships, this is Admiral Harrison," she broadcast to the human fleet. "You know what we're facing. You know what's at stake. You know that conventional tactics won't work against an enemy that's been collecting dead civilizations for 40,000 years." She paused, looking out at the enemy fleet that had come to add humanity to its cosmic collection. "So let's show them what happens when you try to collect a species that's too stubborn to stay dead." The battle began not with weapons fire, but with a conversation that would have been hilarious if it hadn't been taking place between fleets of warships preparing to commit mutual annihilation. Human vessels. The Nekark transmission carried the patient tone of a teacher addressing particularly slow students. "You are significantly outgunned. Surrender now, and your transition to collective membership will be less traumatic." Jake Morrison, now serving as tactical commander for the Lazarus units, responded with the kind of casual profanity that suggested he'd gotten very comfortable with his own mortality. "Yeah, we're going to pass on that offer. See, here's the thing about humans, we've got this really annoying habit of making impossible things happen when people try to tell us what to do." You speak with confidence for someone commanding a handful of ships against our armada. "Oh, these ships." Morrison's laughter crackled across the comm. "These aren't our weapons. We're the weapons. These ships are just how we got here." That's when the human fleet did something that violated every principle of space combat. They opened their cargo bays and began launching their crews directly at the enemy. Hundreds of Lazarus units, each one a walking nuclear reactor powered by quantum rage and wrapped in armor that looked like it had been designed by someone with serious anger management issues, crossed the vacuum of space using nothing but personal jetpacks and absolutely zero regard for their own safety. The Nekark fleet responded with weapon systems that could vaporize asteroids, reduce moons to component atoms, and generally make very large things become very small things very quickly. The Lazarus units tanked the hits and kept coming. "This is impossible," came the transmission from the Nekark flagship. For the first time, the voice carried something other than serene confidence. "No biological organism can survive direct plasma bombardment at those energy levels." "Yeah, well," Morrison's voice carried across space as he punched through the hull of a Nekark destroyer, "good thing we're not exactly biological anymore." What followed was less of a space battle and more of a demonstration in why you should never, ever try to intimidate a species that has weaponized its own death wish. The Lazarus units didn't just board enemy ships. They infected them, turning each vessel into a miniature war zone where the laws of physics went to die. Emma Patterson, now Lazarus Unit Designation LP-047, found herself face-to-face with her first Neckark Collective member in the corridors of an enemy cruiser. What she saw made her grateful that her enhanced physiology had suppressed most of her fear responses. The creature had once been something like a giant insect, all chitinous plates and compound eyes. Now it was something else entirely, a walking fusion of organic matter and scavenged technology, its original form barely recognizable under layers of mechanical enhancement and quantum stabilizers. Child of Terra, it spoke through multiple voice boxes, its words carrying the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 dead civilizations. You fight for a cause already lost. We are inevitable. We are eternal. We are really fucking annoying, Emma interrupted, activating her quantum blade and discovering that cosmic horror wasn't immune to being stabbed with concentrated starlight. The creature collapsed, its collective enhanced consciousness unable to process the concept of a dead teenager who refused to stay intimidated. Emma, to all units, she broadcast as she moved deeper into the ship, these guys are basically space zombies with pretensions. Standard decapitation protocols are effective. On the Neckark flagship, something that had once been the collective consciousness of 17 different species was experiencing what humans might recognize as an existential crisis. For 47,000 years, they had been the apex predators of galactic civilization. Species discovered resurrection technology, the Neckark arrived, and another civilization joined the collective. It was a pattern as reliable as stellar formation. But these humans were different. Analysis. The flagship's collective consciousness demanded from its component minds. The humans are not fighting to avoid death, replied what had once been a proud warrior species called the Kethmori. They are fighting while already dead. Their psychological profile suggests they have achieved something we believed impossible. Which is, they have made peace with their own mortality while retaining their individual consciousness. They die willingly, resurrect themselves, and continue fighting with the accumulated experience of multiple deaths. The collective processed this information through 17 different philosophical frameworks and reached the same conclusion in all of them. This was very bad news for their standard operating procedures. Tactical recommendation? Unknown. We have never encountered a species that treats death as a temporary inconvenience rather than a transcendent state. Our psychological warfare protocols are ineffective against enemies who have already experienced everything we can threaten them with. The moment that changed everything came when Jake Morrison, leading a boarding party into the Neckark flagship, made a discovery that would haunt both species for generations to come. Deep in the ship's core, where its collective consciousness was housed in a chamber the size of a cathedral, Morrison found them, the original minds of every species the Neckark had ever recruited. Thousands of alien consciousness matrices, each one containing the digitized soul of an entire civilization. They were prisoners, not willing converts. Jesus Christ, Morrison whispered, his quantum-enhanced vision processing the scale of the cosmic horror before him. You're not a collective. You're a jail. The central consciousness turned its attention to him, its voice carrying the weight of eons. We offer transcendence beyond death, young human. These minds have joined us willingly in pursuit of eternal existence. Yeah. Morrison approached one of the consciousness matrices, reading the data streams that told the story of a species called the Valdorians, a race of peaceful philosophers who had achieved resurrection technology 12,000 years ago. Then why are they all screaming? Because they were. Every single consciousness matrix was broadcasting the same signal, a continuous scream of rage and despair that had been echoing through the ship's systems for millennia. Morrison's tactical systems automatically began analyzing the chamber's structure, looking for weaknesses, while his enhanced psychology tried to process the magnitude of what he was seeing. Thousands of species, all reduced to digital ghosts, all trapped in an existence they never chose. This isn't transcendence, he said quietly. This is how. And that's when Jake Morrison, career soldier and four-time veteran of his own death, made a decision that would either save the galaxy or doom it. He started freeing the prisoners. What happened when Morrison began releasing 47,000 years' worth of imprisoned civilizations was something that even the Neckark Collective hadn't planned for. a revolution led by the angriest ghosts in galactic history. The first consciousness he freed belonged to a species called the ethereal wanderers, beings of pure energy who had been enslaved so long ago that their original physical forms had been forgotten. Their response to freedom was immediate and violent. They began systematically destroying every Nekark system they could reach. The second consciousness belonged to the Kethmori Empire, warriors who had been forced to watch their captors use their own military tactics against other species for 12,000 years. Their response was even more direct. They started hunting Nekark collective members with the focused fury of professional soldiers who had been denied their deaths for millennia. Within minutes, the Nekark flagship was tearing itself apart as freed consciousness after freed consciousness turned on their captors with the accumulated rage of geological ages. Jake. Emma's voice crackled through his comm from her own boarding operation. Whatever you just did, it's spreading to the other ships. The entire enemy fleet is, well, they're eating themselves. Morrison watched as the chamber around him dissolved into chaos. Alien consciousnesses that had been forced to serve the collective for thousands of years were now free to express their opinions about their captivity, and those opinions were universally negative and frequently violent. All Lazarus units, he broadcast, fall back to the human fleet. We're about to have a lot of very angry company, and I don't think they're going to be picky about who they take their frustrations out on. The aftermath of Jake Morrison's cosmic jailbreak was something that would reshape galactic politics for the next 1,000 years. The Nekark Collective, faced with the simultaneous rebellion of every species they had ever collected, simply ceased to exist as an organized force. But the freed consciousnesses weren't content with just destroying their captors. They wanted revenge on a galactic scale, and they had 47,000 years of accumulated grievances to work through. Admiral Harrison, watching the enemy fleet tear itself apart in what was either the galaxy's most violent civil war or its most therapeutic group therapy session, found herself faced with a new problem. What do you do with several 100,000 extremely angry alien ghosts who have just been freed from cosmic imprisonment? Ma'am, her communications officer reported with the kind of tone that suggested the universe had decided to get creative with its problem solving, we're receiving transmission requests from everyone. Every consciousness that was freed from the Nekark ships wants to talk to us. All of them? At once. Yes, ma'am. And ma'am? They're not just asking to talk. They're asking to join us. Harrison stared at the tactical display showing the remains of what had been the most terrifying enemy fleet in galactic history. Join us how? They want to become part of the Lazarus program, ma'am. They want human-style resurrection technology. They want to become like our dead soldiers. And there it was, the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. Faced with the choice between remaining a small, embattled species and becoming the leaders of a galactic alliance of the vengeful dead, humanity did what it always did when confronted with impossible decisions. They said yes. 6 months later, the galaxy was a very different place. The Nekark Collective was extinct, destroyed by their own prisoners in an orgy of justified revenge that had lasted weeks. Humanity had gone from being a minor colonial species to the de facto leaders of what historians would later call the Resurrection Alliance, a coalition of every species that had ever been forcibly collected by cosmic tyrants. Dr. Chin, now serving as Director of Xenological Resurrection Studies, a job title that would have been science fiction a year ago, found herself dealing with requests for resurrection technology from species that had been dead for longer than human civilization had existed. So let me understand this correctly, Governor Webb said during their weekly briefing. We now have diplomatic relations with the digitized consciousness of a species of warrior poets that died 15,000 years ago, and they want us to give them physical bodies so they can write epic ballads about their revenge? That's the Kethmori, yes. They're actually quite pleasant once you get past the ritualistic death odes and the tendency to compose victory songs about the creative dismemberment of their enemies. And the ethereal wanderers? They want to become energy-based Lazarus units. Something about finally having a cause worth being corporeal for. Chin consulted her notes. Oh, and the Valdorians want to set up a philosophical institute dedicated to the study of constructive mortality. Apparently dying and coming back is considered the ultimate learning experience in their culture. Webb rubbed his temples. Sarah, are we building an alliance or a cosmic support group for the traumatically deceased? Why can't it be both? As humanity settled into its new role as the galaxy's go-to experts on dying creatively and coming back angry, Dr. Chen made another discovery that would keep her awake at night for years to come. The deep space sensors had picked up something new. Not another Neckart collective. Those were extinct, thanks to humanity's talent for liberating cosmic prisoners. This was something else entirely. Something that had been watching the recent events with the kind of interest usually reserved for particularly entertaining sporting events. "Governor," Chen said, staring at readings that suggested the universe was about to get creative with its attempts to kill them, "remember how we thought the Neckart collective was ancient and powerful? Yeah. They were toddlers. What's coming now? It's older. Much older. And according to these energy signatures, it doesn't just collect dead species. What does it collect?" Chen's voice was barely a whisper as she read the analysis that would herald humanity's next impossible challenge. It collects the things that kill the things that think they're immortal. In the depths of space, something that had been sleeping since the galaxy was young began to stir. Something that had watched civilizations rise and fall for millions of years, waiting for species that thought they had conquered death itself. Something that specialized in teaching immortal beings that there were fates worse than dying. And it had just noticed that the galaxy's newest immortals were getting a little too comfortable with their resurrection technology. The question wasn't whether humanity and its alliance of vengeful ghosts could survive what was coming. The question was whether the universe itself could survive what they would become in order to fight it. After all, if you think an alliance of angry dead aliens is terrifying, wait until you see what they're willing to become when something threatens their right to remain gratefully deceased. To be continued? The dead don't stay dead. But what happens when something even older decides they've been having too much fun with mortality? Let me know in the comments if you want to see humanity and its ghost friends face their biggest challenge yet. Subscribe for more stories about why you should never, ever underestimate a species that treats death as a learning experience.